If you're informed on MMA news, I'm sure by now you're aware of the $7 billion deal TKO made with Paramount, where they'll be streaming every UFC event on Paramount Plus. Before that, we had the pay-per-view model, which is going to go on till the beginning of 2026, where every month we have at least one pay-per-view, which can cost a maximum of $80 and a minimum of maybe $30, which is not reasonable at all. Like, who's going to pay $30 for a freaking pay-per-view? We have so many other subscriptions we have to worry about for the month, that being Netflix, whatever the heck else you guys watch, and it's just unrealistic to pay $80 for a pay-per-view. Khabib versus Conor was $55 for a standard edition and $65 for a high. Nowadays, you won't get pay-per-views that expensive because in as much as the UFC has superstars, none of them have the same star power that Khabib and Conor had in their prime. And this isn't WWE where you get to control narratives. Everything is real. Everything is spontaneous. Khabib hated Conor's guts and vice versa. But it doesn't really matter how much the UFC thinks the pay-per-view is worth. It's all going to come down to whether or not the viewers can afford it. And I personally can't. And I want to support the UFC. I want to support the fighters. That's why I'm subscribed to UFC Fight Pass. It only costs like $12.99 a month, which is pretty affordable for middle-class South Africans. But I am not paying for pay-per-views, especially knowing that there's at least one a month. So 12 times 30 equals $360 on UFC pay-per-views, and that's pretty unrealistic. What I do like about UFC Fight Pass is that it's relatively stable compared to these illegal platforms like Stream East, but that should probably be the bare minimum, knowing that I'm paying for the subscription. But what I don't like is the quality of the streams. Sometimes it gets really low, even if you have a stable internet connection, because I'll try experiment watching on YouTube and it'll work fine, but then when I go to UFC Fight Pass, I'm watching on 480p and sometimes 360. And it gets really annoying when you're editing videos. When you're streaming, it's not that much of an issue because you at least want to know what's going on in the fight. But when you're trying to clip content and you're stuck on 360p, you have to keep on refreshing the screen so that the video can be 720, and that takes long. Editing on its own is already a pretty difficult task, and the quality of UFC Fight Pass just makes it harder. Which brings me to my next point. Dana, you want to fight piracy, and in a lot of your videos, you talk about how you want to bring down these platforms like Stream East. You haven't created an environment where we as the fans would want to support the UFC fighters. The pay-per-views are too expensive, and for those of us who are subscribed to UFC Fight Pass, we have a terrible experience. The quality of the streams is low, and there isn't even an option where you can choose the minimum quality the video should be in. That is why I will always support piracy, because it makes the sport more inclusive to the fans who wouldn't watch it otherwise. But I have to remember that the UFC is a business at the end of the day, and they cannot operate unless they make profit. And that is why I try to tread softly anytime I criticize them. But with my surface level knowledge on how the UFC makes money, something tells me that part of it stems from greed, because they have pay-per-view sales, ticket sales, streaming platforms like ESPN Plus and UFC Fight Pass. On top of that, the UFC is broadcasted on satellite television. In South Africa, we have DSTV, and there's a channel that broadcasts every UFC event, including the pay-per-views. Think of all the other satellite TV services that broadcast the UFC. How many fans worldwide are exposed to the brands of the UFC sponsors? That just tells me how much money the UFC makes. At the end of the day, I'm glad that TKO made the deal with Paramount, and only time will tell whether or not it's going to work in their favor. Anyway, y'all let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.